I would be able to wake up very, very early with that one. And that seems to be working there now. Stand there somewhere.
Oh, nobody's.
Oh, okay. I mean, I think for me the key issues, and I'll try to deal with, I mean, the questions raised, which was, I mean, really, really interesting questions. I mean, for me, two things. It's IBSA. I mean, the opportunity and the challenge in IBSA is the idea of all three countries are democracies, building democracy in developing countries with the kind of inequalities and so on. And how do you build it? And how do you translate? And I think that's the difference, you know, to just directly respond to the question, is how does one, if one thinks the difference between BRICS and IBSA, I mean, it would be very difficult for BRICS as a grouping to try to democratize the global trade architecture or the UN system and so on. I mean, because BRICS, philosophically and politically, would really be, the focus really is to give emerging powers a say, whereas I think the really big emphasis of IBSA itself is to democratize the trade system, you know. So for me, that's a really big difference between the two, you know, a bigger say for developing countries versus democratizing of the system. And I mean, in the context really, and that is my focus originally, I mean, the world is where we are now, is in such major structural transformation in a way that we've never seen in generations. What does it mean for IBSA? And just, I mean, the rule book of policy and the state and the market is all gone now. So, and I think there really lies potentially the opportunity for BRICS. Just think about it. I mean, the changes in technology, how technology and the change have changed the way we look at markets, the way we look at the state. Now, these days, global corporations like as Google and Amazon is bigger than our economy, many country development economies. What does it mean from a policy point of view? How does you know, again, from a cooperation between the IBSA, how do we set policy when you have these sort of global companies that we've never seen in the history of mankind, now bigger than the state, and in fact now setting the rules for the state, but also setting the rules for the market, and also maybe thirdly changing identities within countries. Think about this way, I mean, the exciting and also the difficult challenge of IBSA members are that citizens in our countries are very ethnically diverse. And you know, there's a struggle to create new types of common identities that is democratically based and inclusive. How does it, and that is also from, you know, the learning from, how do we learn from India, South Africa, how do we learn from Brazil, and the other way around, to build in this world now where the state, the nation state, is not in the old way, the sort of unitary, because as I said, the way the market changes, the corporation, and so on. So the regulation of markets now, I think, is not straightforward anymore. And for me, I mean, the second change, really the change that wasn't there before, is think about climate change, how climate change now has changed developing countries also. I mean, we just, a couple of years ago, in South Africa, in Durban, we had, I mean, a storm that has the types of storms we've seen that we've never seen before. And how, you know, what are the learnings? How can we cooperate between BRICS countries in that context? For example, I mean, now if you think about we've just completed a long, you know, 5-year study on sub-Saharan Africa, just in terms of looking at institutions and conflicts. And actually what came out of there is how climate change actually now fueling most of more than 90% of the conflicts, not only the ethnic conflicts, but also the religious and also terrorism. What does it mean from an IBSA point of view? How do we collaborate? I mean, from a South African point of view, if we look into the region, those sort of conflicts, I mean, this is pretty new. Where do we get the collaboration? You know, is there some kind of collaboration in their context, in ideas and so on? And then really the policy space we chose, I mean, in 2012, of course, there was the issue of the policy space was always there. Developing countries struggle with the policy space. But actually, it's even worse now in the era of Trump. If you think about what's happening with the global trade, the sort of conflicts between the US and other countries now, it is, at the heart of it is a policy space. Can developing countries come up with their own independence in policy, their own kind of policy, whether it's trade policy and so on? One would have thought that perhaps over time there's more space. Actually, there's increasingly less policy space. And how do we collaborate as IBSA to try to open up their policy space? I mean, I know 10 or 15 years ago in South Africa, at least, you know, we thought really that, you know, there's an opening of policy space. You know, as the world changed, actually there's been a shrinking of policy space. And I think from an IBSA point of view, really there's a great opportunity to be in that space. And then for me, lastly, you know, the true way from the global trade architecture is the rules are unfair, but the conflict mechanism, global trade conflict mechanism, how do we democratize that? And how does IBSA collaborate to democratize, I mean, you know, that the mechanism? I mean, if you're a developing country, really, there is even the WTO's conflict mechanism is dominated by industrial countries. So, you know, developing countries are on their own, essentially. So how does one think in that process together to try to think about alternative dispute resolutions in that context?
Thank you very much, Professor Gumede, for setting out your initial thoughts and appreciate your putting the broader context and asking the question as to where IBSA would have a role on this, and I'm sure some of the answers will come, and we'll go back to you in a short while when you can further elaborate your ideas. Thank you very much. Now, thank you. Now I'm going to request Professor Lima to address you and share both his questions and I hope answers as well.
First of all, I thank you. I would like to thank for inviting Professor Skin. And for me, I'm honored to be here. You know, I'm very happy to be here. So I would like to talk about the international environment and the strategies of wholly of the IBSA. You know, because I think very important we think about the new scenario of international economy. You know, because I think affect our encounters, especially affect Brazil, India, and South Africa. Okay, so the India-Brazil-South Africa Dialogue Forum created in 2003 with the Brazilian declarations constitute a strategic alliance of cooperation between countries in the global geopolitical and economic south. As a South-South cooperation initiative, the IBSA Forum is unique because it involves a small number of members who are not part of the same continent or geographic region. These are countries that share similarities in socio-economic and political characteristics. It's important to have clarity two key functions that the IBSA has. First, that the IBSA Dialogue Forum, as an alliance of developing countries, its intermediate level, is a strategically defined alliance with a few members which has a great potential to contribute to increase in the status of its three countries in the international system. Secondly, that the forum, through its peer-to-peer techno-scientific cooperation strength, due to the degree of knowledge consolidated and developed in strategic areas in each of three countries, has the potential to leverage science and technology developers of partners, essential for socio-economic development. The potential South-South cooperation for global development has been reclaimed by IBSA leaders as one of the rationales for the initiative's existence. In 2011, during the 50th summit, the leaders of the three countries pledged to continue to advance the agreed principles of South-South cooperation. They also emphasized that South-South cooperation is a common effort of people in the culture of the South, a partnership between equals, which should be guided by the principles of respect for national sovereignty, national ownership and independence, equality, no conditions, no interference in domestic affairs, and mutual benefit. From this IBSA relevance perspective, it's fundamental to have a clarity of the new international scenario in consolidation with four basic characteristics. One, with allowing international economic recovery after the global crisis of 2008 and new normal. Two, perspective of a deepening of the international economic crisis. Three, rise to power from more conservative governments in the international economy, made in defend an anti-global agenda. And four, the passive role of the World Trade Organization, especially in relation of developing countries. What's the international economic environment? Two major trends in the evolution of international relations marked at the beginning of the 21st century. On the one hand, emerging players such as China, India, Brazil, and South Africa alter the global distribution of power, calling into question the legitimacy and effectiveness of existing schemes. And on the other hand, the emergence of increased global challenges such as climate change and proliferation of weapons and mass destruction. However, the views of emerging powers on how to take a global challenge are not automatically aligned. The fact is that the system has remained dynamic and competitive, with great power struggling to maintain its prominence and other countries struggling to maintain or change their status, depending on their relative position in the world system. In general, Europe and Japan strive to maintain their privileged position. Russia seeks to regain part of its position of lost power. China is advanced as the second economic power, and its rise is a major factor to destabilize the international order. With the rise of these countries in the global order, South-South cooperation has gained relevance as a political strategy of developing countries, create partnership for mutual benefit or for the benefit of the country or with relatively less development. This partnership may be related to all the above mentioned types of developed cooperation. South-South cooperation is also referred to as horizontal cooperation, as opposed to North-South cooperation, which would be a vertical cooperation. That is, South-South cooperation is seen as a great possibility of equitable relation between nations, if consider the asymmetries between the countries. From these events, it was hoped that a new cycle of economic development would predominate for developing countries, particularly considering IBSA member countries. However, I believe that Laos' recovery of the international economy after the crisis of 2008 has created a scenario for the rise more conversation governments that are against a great insertion of the developing countries in the international economy. The world economy is experiencing a moment of great recession, and it indicates that this scenario must last for the next 2 years, according to the latest report released by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. Global expansion continues to weaken, and this should result in a reduction in global growth. The revision of the projection downwards affects almost all G20 economies. According to the OECD, this slowdown is a result of high political uncertainty and the continued trade tensions recently triggered by the United States, which has been adopting restrictive measures, giving a new direction to international trade. The IMF points to a need to reduce global trade tensions. With a more cautious analysis, the IMF projects a growth of 4% 2019, maintaining the same level of the immediately previous year in 2018. According to the WTO, the number of new measures restricting international trade increased by 22% over the previous 12 months. This scenario has as protagonists the United States and China, the main economic powers, whose protection actions reflect the commercial war involving $314 billion in trade. The trade war began in March 2018 when President Donald Trump followed his campaign promise, imposing 25% tax on Chinese imports. Following the principle of reciprocity, China retaliated with tariffs equivalent to agricultural products originating in the United States. In fact, what is observed in the world economy is an anti-globalization tendency, especially developed countries defend measures to protect their respective domestic markets. This logic highlights the performance of the World Trade Organization at a sensitive time, and that developing countries cannot expect measures I made and benefit us. I believe that this scenario of conflict tends to be accentuated next years, mainly due to the continuity of the low international economic growth and even the possibility of a new crisis of capitalism. If this particular scenario is confirmed, protection measures and trade wars will worsen. Require developed countries to deepen South-South relations from a strategic governance perspective of international political and trade relations. There is, at this moment, think about new strategy for action among IBSA countries is essential. This geopolitical perspective of the international economy consider their interstate competition of the capitalists is evident in the moment of the world economy, with the conflicts between the United States and China, as well as among other countries. It is important to have clarity in each scenario because, more than ever, the articulation between India, Brazil, and South Africa becomes fundamental, especially consider the need for great political articulation among these countries to become part of the world economy. Consider that India and South Africa in Brazil traditionally belong to the peripheral world, or to the technology and global south, and that they historically wish to improve their positions in terms of economic development level and level of influence development autonomy, which is central to these countries. IBSA countries have been able to observe at various in their history how central countries pose difficulties for the development strategies of emerging countries. Examples are the offensives against national development policy, such as the protection of nascent industry and the imposition of a liberalization agenda of world trade, aggravated by intellectual property protection rules that hindered the effort of the economic south. In the second half of the 20th century, the three countries have in common the fact that they have achieved reasonable industrialization of the economies, accelerated urban growth, and agriculture's modernization, set up an accelerated economic development which changed in the productive and social structure, albeit uniquely within their territories. In these countries, rich and opulent niche coexist with large areas of extreme poverty, especially in rural areas and in peripheries or large cities. These obstacles in the economic sphere make it fundamental the search for autonomy that allow the permanent adoption of the developed strategies for the countries of the South. The search for development autonomy become complementary since a great degree for political autonomy allows more development strategies. For this reason, the topic of international cooperation requires a joint understanding of a development project and external policy that guide cooperation policy. In foreign policy in 20th century, the three IBSA countries resemble the more diversified and increasing global objectives of post-close partnerships with other developing countries and renew efforts to reform the United Nations system and its Security Council and the international forums in general. This is not to propose here that the three IBSA countries have a similar story. Each of them has a unique story. Like most nations, however, we have points of convergence between the three histories, similarities in terms of the structural challenge of chosen countries in the terms of their relative position of economic development and the international position, insertion. These points of identity were rescued to justify the information of the IBSA Forum and in view of the international scenario of conflict between nations, with the possibility of continuity of the crisis of capitalism, it becomes even more fundamental to analyze more instruments of articulation of integration policy between these countries to have a great representation in the world economy. IBSA international strategy is characterized by its pragmatism and our political weight, as well as the legitimacy to present itself as a relevant interlocutor at the international level. This reflects the foreign policy focus of the three members. The IBSA's great international station point would be an interactions to form new paradigms of global governance, a new balance of power in the world, and the search for a secure regional environment in the south of each continent. This international session of the bloc takes place mainly in multilateral forums and international organizations. Once again, I affirm that this strategy of political articulation between the IBSA countries become essential, mainly because of the scenario of a growth, political and commercial dispute among nations in the international economy. I believe that this scenario will be further accentuated by the continuation of the economic crisis of capitalism, leading the developed nation to adopt policies to protect their domestic markets, bring losses made to developed nations. The IBSA initiatives has been successful on several points, but I believe its great success lies in its ability to converge the main goals and common discourses between its three countries and the other members of the regions which they lead. The IBSA project has a future, and there are currently no reason to discuss it the end. On the contrary, what should be discussed are the improvements to be submitted. One thing is certain: the very fact that there is an initiative aimed at raising the voice of developing countries worldwide is already relevant in itself, as it already demonstrates to developing countries and the leaders that the developed world is cooperation and seeking forces to fight for decisions that contemplate the people-to-peer interest, faced with the crisis capitalism, I consider that the strengthening of the IBSA, therefore, becomes more than even necessary in view of the need to strengthen South-South relation. Thank you very much.